Today, I said my final goodbye to my son, Ryan, who passed away. My heart hurts even more because my husband, Mike, didn't even come to the funeral. Feeling both angry and sad, I called him. To my shock, his voice was cheerful. I'm in Hawaii for my parents' 70th anniversary, he said, not noticing the pain in my voice. When I told my mom, she was stunned at first but quickly became angry. They're in Hawaii? She exclaimed, her face red with frustration. Without a second thought, she decided to confront Mike and his parents. I'm Emily, a 40-year-old office worker. Mike and I have been married for 10 years, and we had one child, Ryan. For the past 2 years, Ryan fought leukemia, spending most of his time in the hospital. His classmates often visited, bringing him joy. Ryan's strength inspired us all, and he gave me hope to keep going. My parents were always there for Ryan. My mom often talked about how she couldn't wait to see him enjoy his favorite foods again. Even my dad, who was diagnosed with dementia, visited often. One day, mistaking me for a nurse, he said, "Thank you for taking care of my grandson." It was bittersweet. He forgot me, but never forgot Ryan. Ryan was wise for his age. He understood my dad's condition and played along when Grandpa said something odd. Their bond was heartwarming, unlike Ryan's relationship with his father. I once begged Mike to visit Ryan, asking, "Don't you care about what he's going through?" His response crushed me. "Ryan doesn't like me, so it's better if I stay away. Besides, I'm busy." Mike was never involved in Ryan's care, not even when Ryan was a baby. Naturally, Ryan grew distant from him. When Mike had free time, he spent it with his parents, who also showed no interest in Ryan's health. "How can he be so heartless?" my mom asked. "And his parents? Do they not care about Ryan at all?" I half joked. Maybe I married the wrong person. I had fallen for Mike's kindness when we were dating, but he turned cold and distant after we got married. "If I'd known, I would have never introduced him to you," my mom said, her voice heavy with regret. Mike and I met through my uncle, who was friends with Mike's dad. Back then, Mike seemed kind, and we started dating. Soon, we were married, but after the wedding, his parents changed. My mother-in-law became controlling, even threatening me. "You'll do as I say, or we'll make sure you get a proper divorce," she once said. Over time, my father-in-law also showed his true colors. He often made insulting remarks. "We only let you marry Mike because the head of our family introduced you. Otherwise, someone like you wouldn't have married our son," he said. I didn't understand his attitude at first. Later, I learned that my uncle mentioned my family's wealth during the introduction, which made my father-in-law assume we owned valuable properties. This fueled his rude behavior. After our wedding, Mike convinced my parents to let us live in my late grandparents' house. "It's close to her family, so we can help take care of them," he said. My parents agreed, but having Mike's parents nearby became a problem. Mike would invite them over and brag, saying things like, "Our house is twice as big as yours." His father seemed annoyed, but his mother smiled and said, "We could live here together. It's better than our place." One day, I asked Mike, "Are you planning to have your parents move in with us? This isn't even your house." He laughed it off, saying it was just a joke, but his mother's actions said otherwise. She started visiting often, picking out a room for herself. My father-in-law even muttered, "At least there's no rent in this dump." His words made me furious, but his wife's behavior was even worse. She ignored me completely while acting like the house was hers. When Mike didn't say anything, I decided to make things clear. "This house belongs to my parents. It used to be my grandparents' home, so it's a bit old," I explained. My in-laws looked surprised, but my father-in-law quickly dismissed it, saying, "That's why it's in such bad shape." His tone was rude, even though the house was much better than theirs. My mother-in-law accused me of lying. "I trust my son more than you," she said. I didn't argue further, but I worried they might try to move in. That worry faded when I found out I was pregnant. Suddenly, all talk of them moving in stopped. Maybe they realized they'd have to help with the baby if they lived here. One day, I overheard my mother-in-law say, "Emily's parents should take care of the baby since they live nearby." I'm not doing it. I hadn't even asked for her help, but her comment hurt. It was hard to believe she didn't care about her first grandchild. When I told my mom about it, she just laughed. "Don't worry, leave the babysitting to me," she said. "You don't need to ask someone who doesn't want to care for a sweet grandchild." She was right, and I decided to rely on my parents for help after the baby was born. When my son was born, my parents were overjoyed. They visited often and were so excited. My in-laws, on the other hand, only visited once, and even Mike didn't seem to care much. His reaction was disappointing. "Don't worry, my mom said, trying to comfort me. Once the baby grows a little, Mike will feel more like a father. But as time passed, Mike showed no interest in our child. When our son turned 5, he fell seriously ill. After tests, the doctors told us he had pediatric cancer. I was heartbroken and expected Mike to support me. Instead, he coldly said, "You'll have to pay for it yourself. It's not my problem." His words crushed me. To make it worse, my mother-in-law blamed me. "It's because of Emily's genes that Ryan has cancer," she sneered. "No one in our family has anything like that. It's her fault." My father stood up for me immediately. "Don't you care about Ryan? We'll take care of him ourselves. You can do whatever you want," he said firmly. His support forced my husband and in-laws to leave quietly. Even though I was overwhelmed by Ryan's illness, my parents' encouragement kept me going. "Stay strong. Ryan needs you," my mom said. With their help, I managed to care for Ryan and continue working. They were retired and dedicated themselves to supporting me, and I was endlessly grateful. Despite his diagnosis, Ryan's condition initially improved, and he was able to enjoy life like any other child. But Mike doubted how serious it was. "Is Ryan really sick? Or are you just trying to fool me?" he once asked. Watching Ryan play, his words were hurtful, but I didn't bother arguing. Over time, Mike spent less and less time at home, staying with his parents instead. Oddly, his absence made things easier for me since he only brought negativity. My parents took turns helping with Ryan. Meanwhile, Mike showed little interest in his son's life. He only started coming home more often after Ryan was hospitalized 2 years ago. Even then, his priorities were clear. "Leave the housework to me," he'd say casually, then add with a smirk, "By the way, why don't you just give me this house?" I ignored him, but it was obvious he cared more about the property than Ryan. During this time, my father was diagnosed with dementia. My mom and I were constantly busy taking care of him, but my husband and in-laws didn't even notice or care. Even when my father visited occasionally, my husband and in-laws seemed unaware of his condition. One day, my husband casually said, "Your parents were here earlier, just wandering around. Aren't they going to help with Ryan?" His relaxed tone infuriated me, but I was too tired to argue. As my father's dementia worsened, my uncle started visiting more often. He and my mother had serious discussions, but when I asked about it, my mom only gave vague answers. I worried, but Ryan's worsening condition consumed all my attention. When I updated my husband about Ryan's health, his response shocked me. "I'm busy right now. Stop calling me. You handle Ryan's situation," he said coldly. His lack of care pushed me to the edge, and I started thinking about leaving him. Not long after, Ryan passed away. The grief was unbearable. I couldn't manage the arrangements, but my mother and uncle stepped in, allowing me to stay by Ryan's side until the end. Before the funeral, my uncle grew anxious. "Where are Mike and his parents? They can't skip the funeral, can they?" he said, frustrated. I called my husband, trembling. "Where are you?" "It's time to say goodbye to Ryan," I said. "I'm at a party celebrating my parents' anniversary." "I told you not to call me," he replied cheerfully. My mother overheard and angrily exclaimed, "He's in Hawaii." My uncle, furious, sprang into action. Though I hadn't expected much from my husband, knowing he chose a vacation over our son's funeral broke me. "You knew Ryan was in critical condition and still went on a trip," I said, my voice shaking. "I pity Ryan for having a father like you." I hung up, tears streaming down my face. My mother comforted me. "I'll never forgive them. Don't worry, everything will be gone by the time they return from Hawaii," she said cryptically. I was too drained to ask what she meant. With my family's support, the funeral went smoothly, but afterward, I felt lost. My life had revolved around Ryan, and I didn't know how to move forward. "Leave the future to me, Emily. Go back to your parents' house and rest," my uncle advised. Following his advice, I moved back home, helped care for my father, and took time off work. Thankfully, my workplace was understanding and gave me an extended break. One day, my husband called. "Emily, I can't get into the house. Did you change the locks?" "Changing them without notice is awful," he said, panicked. "I didn't change the locks," I replied calmly, "but I'm planning to end things with you, so don't call me anymore." I hung up, but moments later, he called again, this time frantic. "My parents' house has been demolished. There's a land for sale sign up." "What's going on?" he yelled. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said and cut him off. "Check with my uncle." When I asked my uncle about it, he smiled and invited me to visit my in-laws' home. Curious, I went. When I arrived, I saw my husband and his parents standing outside, stunned. What's the meaning of this? My father-in-law demanded. Our house is gone. Is this because we didn't take you to Hawaii? Did you demolish the house out of spite? The accusation shocked me. I could never do something like that, I said, frustrated. I was grieving my son and arranging his funeral. Just then, my uncle and mother arrived. My mother's expression was cold and firm. People who didn't even attend their own grandson's funeral have no right to complain, she said. Even after Ryan's passing, my husband's behavior remained appalling. When I confronted him about missing our son's funeral, his family accused me of spitefully demolishing their house. My mother, sharp and unwavering, silenced their rants. Reflect on your actions, she said sternly. My father-in-law produced a dubious contract claiming ownership of the property, but my mother quickly revealed that the land belonged to her, not my father, who suffered from dementia. My uncle presented official records proving they were renters who hadn't paid rent for months. My in-laws' attempts to manipulate and exploit my father unraveled before them, leaving them humiliated. Mike, desperate, tried to claim another fake contract, assuming our home was my father's property. My mother shook her head in disbelief. You tried to deceive us, without even verifying who owned the land. It's absurd. As the confrontation escalated, a woman emerged, a young mistress, demanding repayment for covering Mike's travel expenses. My uncle smirked. Even after your son's death, you took your mistress to Hawaii. You truly are shameless. The revelation left Mike exposed. Realizing his infidelity and deceit, I confronted him. How does it feel to have funded your extravagant trip using Ryan's life insurance? Unfortunately for you, I'm the beneficiary. After filing for divorce, more truths came to light. Mike had been cheating for 2 years, scheming to avoid child support while using Ryan's insurance money for himself. His plans collapsed when he realized the property belonged to my mother. In the end, Mike faced mounting debts, alimony payments, and abandonment by his mistress. Alone and financially ruined, he became a shadow of his former self. Back at my family home, I began to heal. My mother and I cared for my father, and I found solace believing Ryan's spirit was near. One day, my father murmured unexpectedly, "Ryan is visiting. He's running around happily." Though startled, I chose to see it as a sign. Ryan's memory became my strength, pushing me to live positively. For his sake, I vowed to keep moving forward.